I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
I think we got to be careful not to look back at it with too much ire and aversion, because it's human evolution. We believe the gods were angry. It makes sense that entire systems were built to try to resolve that anger. And I think the ultimate seeds of Christianity are don't be afraid, and perfect love casts out all fear, even the fear of God. The ultimate essence of Christian spirituality is letting go of Jesus.
Welcome everyone to episode 118 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today I interview Pastor Stan Mitchell. His church is called GracePoint, right here in the Nashville area. And he's been a source of a lot of controversy in the last few years, not only in his embrace of LGBTQ congregants, but an overall reformation of what it means to be Christian. Stan started preaching in the Oneness Pentecostal vein at age 16. He didn't have a skeptical thought toward his Christianity until his early 20s. We were colleagues at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Stan's personal evolution has brought us today the most honest version of himself he's ever lived. He hasn't lost his faith entirely, but he has lost his certainty. As with so many of the Christians I've interviewed on this podcast, they deconstruct theology and embrace science and reality to their best ability and find, when the smoke clears, that there remains a Jesus they can keep and honor and heed. This spectrum of how much of the old narrative is salvageable and redemptive is a recurring question in this movement, and while some of us have burned the whole house down, others find value in sifting through the rubble for keepsakes. Perhaps it's sentimentalism. Perhaps it's comfortable. I personally don't care, as long as we're stemming the tide of radical religious fundamentalism and its toxic effect on the survival of our species. At the end of my talk with Stan, Bob and I discuss the conversation, and then I tag on to the end a 21-minute excerpt from a Pete Holmes episode of You Made It Weird with guest Hasan Minhaj, a correspondent from The Daily Show. They discuss these very tensions of anti-theism versus a redemptive post-theism. I decided to interview Stan on the porch and without Bob. I almost always interview Christians one-on-one so they don't feel teamed up on. And I chose the porch because my studio is plastered with photos and quotes of famous atheists. As a result, the sonic quality is peppered with the sounds of nature, airplanes, and sirens, so please bear with that. I believe this conversation is well worth it. Stan's oration skills and genuine candidness make for an authentic artistic achievement in a mutually respectful conversation. We taped this conversation on September 17th, 2016. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast, give it 5 stars, and/or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show is available on most podcast platforms. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. On a per-episode basis through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA Podcast. Or leave a donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green, titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music is by Sam Mayer, recorded on a handpan in the New York subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. What we like to do is start, no matter who our guest is start with your childhood religious context.
So my childhood religious context was 5 generations deep, Northeast Arkansas, genetically inbred. Not inbred, that's not good. Arkansas and inbred. That was a Freudian slip, wasn't it?
It was instilled in you.
It was instilled in me, not genetically inbred, genetically bred in me, Pentecostalism.
Okay.
And not just Pentecostalism, but a real subculture of Pentecostalism. If you do the religious taxonomy from Christian, Protestant, evangelical, Wesleyan, Pentecostal, our group was actually the group that are known as Oneness Pentecostals. Mm-hmm. You familiar with those guys?
I've heard of it, but not really.
The interesting thing about them is they're not classical Pentecostal in the sense of classical Wesleyanism, where you have a second work of grace, baptism of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. The baptism of the Holy Spirit was necessary for salvation in our movement.
Right.
So for like Assembly of God, Church of God, those guys, the baptism of the Holy Spirit is like a turbocharge on an already good engine.
Yeah.
Ours is you don't have an engine.
Yeah, unless you speak in tongues.
Until you speak in tongues.
Yeah.
And so, we had people that went to the altar for 30 years and didn't speak in tongues, and we buried them lost. And so it was that narrow of a group, and that's what I grew up in all of my life. We were the only group within Christianity saved. When we talked about comparative world religions, we were talking about Baptist and Church of Christ.
Yeah.
So that's how sectarian it was. We literally, we didn't think we were saved, but we thought if anybody had a chance, it would be us.
Oh, I see.
And
Wait,
so I
didn't think you were saved?
No, I never felt any sense. There was no security.
Okay.
And that old joke about getting saved over and over, for us, that was not a joke. That was
the practice.
It was, I remember my mother told me she only began to sense, some sentiment of peace in her hope of going to heaven when she reached her 60s.
Yeah.
We were always just trying to make sure that we were going to make it in.
Working out your salvation with fear and trembling.
And our fear and trembling was a fevered pitch.
Golly.
You laugh now to keep from crying.
That's stressful though, right?
It was horrible. I developed, by the time I was in 2nd grade, I bought it so hook, line, and sinker. I had a spastic colon and was biting my fingernails to the quick. I lived on Rapture Alert. And not everybody has that personality. It's like Buechner says, a lot of theology is autobiography. My brother was 2 years older and a fantastic guy, and I was like Velcro, and he was like Teflon. Okay. It never stuck with him. But it did me. I bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, and in this case, when we say stuck, when I think about your brother or people that, we've witnessed our whole life people who throw themselves into something with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and others that seem to be tourist Christians or superficial or shallow or weak or whatever. But those of us that took it and took it serious, I mean, we took Revelation chapter 3, if you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. We took that hot and cold and literally and seriously, and that we wanted to be, I know for myself, I wanted to be a man after God's own heart. I wanted to be, it was almost like I wanted to be God's special friend. Just that friendship that certain men of God throughout Scripture had.
Abraham.
Yeah,
was a friend
that
of God,
they were God's buddies. And in my perspective, God loved the whole world, but he had some special friends, and I wanted to be in that company. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that resonates. That's a far warmer depiction.
Yeah, it sounds
than
like
than what we experienced. Again, what I experienced, and I never want to impose this on an entire group of people because maybe others did not experience that within that group. But
Yeah.
our little girls couldn't cut their hair. We couldn't play Little League baseball because it was a worldly amusement.
Mm-hmm.
God was an incredibly angry entity, and the idea of friendship with God would have been strange. God was harsh, exacting, and incredibly magnanimous to possibly let a couple of 100,000 people spend eternity with Him out of the billions that have lived.
And if you're one of the lucky ones,
Yeah. And even that was not, we were certainly Armenian to the hilt, but the unconditionality of the tulip and election, we sensed that God was just going to let a few people be in the praise choir of heaven for His glory, not anything.
And
that
in
they
your
had done.
mind, His criteria for choosing those people was what?
There was no criteria. We never thought about the fact that it really came down to the whimsy and the caprice of geography or where you were born. We never thought about that. I suppose we did think there was something we were doing, that maybe we were the more sincere.
Penitent.
We somehow had a level of sincerity that the rest of the world didn't have, and that's why we had found the truth.
Yeah. Beat your breast. A lot of kneeling at the altar, I'm sure.
Oh, we paid a high price, and salvation was free, but we really didn't think that. We thought that the $1 trillion debt was simply rolled into a high interest payment plan that got taken out of our hide every day and would be for the rest of eternity.
And it's, to me, and I'm sure you discovered this, but I'm about to say that's unsustainable, and yet you probably watched a lot of people go all the way to their grave with that kind of intensity.
The amazing thing is watching intelligent people sustain that.
Yeah.
But you and I both know everywhere academic exposure goes up, and by academic, just people developing a broadening view of life and the multiverse, everywhere that goes up, that type of religion over time does go down. And to some degree, on you guys' end, you would say not just that type of religion, but religion at all. Mine was a caricatured version of all religion. It led me to I began to tunnel my way out. I remember I was 21. I started preaching at 16 because in that world, young preachers were all the rage, and they were kind of like child stars. If you find a precocious young kid, you tap into his parroting,
Probably because there was a sense of purity in children, like out of the mouth of babes, and he's untainted by the world or less tainted by the world, and God's really
probably so
speaking to him.
But by the time I was 21, I remember at 21, I'd been preaching 5 years. I had not had my first existential doubt on any level. I didn't question anything. I mean, a woman cutting her hair and is there a God, those were not primary and secondary issues. They were all on one level.
Yeah.
And I had not had my first existential doubt till I was 21. And then a Methodist neighbor lady of mine gave me a Max Lucado book. Mm-hmm. And we weren't supposed to read what was called external literature.
Yeah.
People who wrote outside of the faith. And Max Lucado, this Church of Christ guy, was obviously anathema and a lost individual. So some of our older, more seasoned ministers had enough wherewithal psychologically and spiritually. They could read external literature, mostly to find out what the devil's ploy was, but we couldn't. I remember for some reason, I held that book like contraband.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was my Playboy under the bed.
I was going to say, hide it under the mattress.
I literally put that under my bed at my little house there in Davis Place in Pyrrhus, Arkansas, and for a year I didn't read it, but I kept pulling it out and looking at it.
Just at the cover?
Just looking at it, thinking, And I remember I'd kind of run out of messages to preach, and I thought, maybe there's something in here that I could kind of rip off because nobody in our world would know. You don't even have to annotate. You don't even have a moral responsibility, to cite somebody if they're not a saved person.
Yeah.
And I read the book and I was scandalized within my framework of Christianity to hear somebody talk about Jesus
and grace
in a way that it didn't make sense, but it actually kind of wooed me. Mm-hmm. And that began a journey of swimming upstream that 27 years later, I hadn't quite dumped into the ocean that you've dumped into, but my tributary is not far from that river.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Science Mike and Michael Gunger?
I did their podcast not long ago. Yeah.
See, I lost track of it. I'll go back and check that one out. I should have been research for this one, but Science Mike just did an interview with Ryan Bell on his show, Life After God. And he's the Seventh-day Adventist that did a year without God. And then, anyway, Science Mike has an interesting approach, where he was fundamentalist, evangelical, Southern Baptist, I think, and deconstructed all the way to atheism. Then had an experience with God on the beach. You know that one. He's just got a book out this week.
Meeting God in the Waves.
Yeah. And anyway, his talk with Ryan was fascinating because he's completely transparently honest about the fact that, I went back to a mystic version of Christianity framed in the tradition of Christianity. Yeah, because that's my tradition. He doesn't make any truth claims. He's not exclusive that Christianity is the only way or whatever. It's just an interesting journey, but I felt like in that interview that Ryan pretty much got him to admit that, I realized that they didn't use the word security blanket, but it is something that he said, look, it makes me a better person, makes me happier, it's not hurting anybody. I don't care what anybody thinks. I kind of went back to a version of his tradition that works for him and his science and his intellect, and unapologetically and knowingly and overtly admits, that's just because I was born in America, and this is what I'm comfortable with. I have a group of ex-Christians that I meet with regularly, and for some of them, they have no desire to go back. Others kind of miss something. A lot of the...
It's not an intellectual conviction as much as it's a tribal, sociological, nesting
emotional
sense of home. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
That's a part of almost every faction of our life, isn't it, to some degree? Some of us are more sentimental and nostalgic than others.
Yeah.
Again, that's where autobiography plays into a lot of our theology.
Yeah.
That hasn't been my journey. My journey, probably as I begin to head down that path with the Max Lucado contraband, I figured something out. I figured out if you want to find out what an author really thinks, don't read what they write, read who they read.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody has to write for an audience, and that audience generally is connected to their livelihood. Mm-hmm. But read who they read. And I would go to their bibliography, and I would be like, well, who moved this guy? And I bibliographied my way upstream through, those Christian books until you find it doesn't take 5 or 6 generations of that until you finally land with John Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg, the Jesus Seminar people, even John Shelby Spong, those guys. So by the time I got there in my late 20s, early 30s, I never had that experience of just being bereft of faith. I got delivered of certainty.
Yeah.
I had no sense that there was anything we could do. I made it beyond, exclusivistic Christianity. I became very pluralistic in my Christianity. Mm-hmm. I knew that this was our way of doing things, but why would our way be better than other people's ways? That, the experience of the divine, that metaphysical thing is played out and explained through different cultures in different ways. So I came to that. But then I finally moved through that, and just the whole idea of God, you go through that panentheism, pantheism, theocentrism, deism. Mm-hmm. And what finally I was left with was just the vast mystery of all of this. And that there was no way empirically that anybody could say they know any of this.
Yeah.
And it left me what I began calling, literally 15 years ago, I heard Don McCullough, a Presbyterian guy from San Francisco, coin the phrase Reverent agnostic.
Reverent agnostic.
Yeah. And I became satisfied with that. I was a reverent agnostic Christian. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to get kind of cute with Christian people, when they would say, well, how can you be an agnostic Christian? Well, gnosis, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I would even throw back on them, well, Jesus said you don't have to know, you just have to believe. Mm-hmm. I don't know it's going to rain tomorrow. I believe it's going to rain tomorrow. And belief is a gradient between 1 and 99. It's not 0 or 100.
Yeah.
It's the absence of certainty. And so my theism is really just this reverent agnosticism that's somewhere, and I don't know, maybe this is lazy. I don't think it's lazy because I still explore philosophically. But I've just become really satisfied that there are some mysteries in terms of the nature of the universe and God that we have not resolved right now. I don't know that we'll ever fully resolve them. And I'm kind of peaceful with living with the mystery of it all. Whereas where I came from, your eternal destiny was dependent upon you believing correctly. So it's been a real healing journey for me just to become satisfied with mystery and for it not to drive me nuts. The reason that I've never really moved past reverent agnosticism is I entertain atheism as a possibility. I entertain theism as a possibility. But I never have heard in my own soul a good enough argument for any of them for me to settle into any measure of certainty.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhere between theism and atheism, and this reverent agnosticism has been satisfying for me.
Well, there's a guy named Anthony Magnabosco, and he does this thing called street epistemology. He wants to talk to strangers about their beliefs, and he almost always starts with their deeply held beliefs. He kind of zeroes in on what are your deeply held beliefs. Then he gets them to say, all right, on a scale of 0 to 100, where are you in your certainty of those beliefs? And many times, because let's say they'll say, I believe in God, and they'll say 100. And then sometimes they'll ask him, and because when I had him on the show, I was like, well, you're 0, right? And he was like, oh, no. Basically what you're saying is he didn't prescribe that anybody be a 0 and be honest.
Right.
And he would also say the same of 100. So you're right, as far as everybody's in there somewhere, and because neither pole is empirically provable, and so find yourself somewhere that's comfortable for you.
I wish there was like a LED meter, on our forehead where I could kind of see where I am, because it's like
where
pain.
Others are.
You really don't know what feels like horrible pain to you, and you call a 7 out of 10 might be a 4 to somebody else.
Right.
But how do we know any of this stuff? I think I have settled with the French existentialist in terms of I think therefore I am. I'm as close to 100 I think as I can get that I do exist.
Yep.
But man, there's a lot of folk who aren't. A lot of folk, are still wrestling with that Descartes question.
Yeah. Is this the Matrix? Is this
I know.
Is this somebody's imagination? Or?
And I've heard enough of that I've kind of wavered off my 100 even there. But
Yeah.
I'm in the upper 90s on I exist. And then I suppose the second question for me would be, and that's I'm asking it within the realm of this overarching question of God and spirituality. My second question is life merely organic, or is there some underpinning of meaning that derives from a source that had a mind of some kind?
Right.
And for me, that one levitates somewhere between 50 and 90. And I don't know. I have some kind of paranormal experience, and it bumps it up, and then you can go for years kind of dry of that. But I never have really fallen down into the 20s and teens with that one. I have a sense that this is more than organic.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that even drives theists and atheists to sit around and talk about that.
And here we
There's
are.
some sense of meaning making. What Peirce used to call semiotics and meaning making. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the third question is, okay, if there is meaning, does it derive from a personal source? What is the nature of this source? Does it have a mind? Is it a person? Is it a cosmic? Is it Star Wars or Baptist? And that, geez, I don't know. I've always, people say, well, you're so relativistic on that. But I've always thought, if there is a God, and God came down and we were sitting around the table doing math, and you said 1 + 1 = 7, and somebody else said it equals 17, and somebody else said it equals 1,043, and somebody else said it equals 94, and we looked at God and said, okay, who's right? I think God would say, you're all wrong to varying degrees, but I appreciate the fact that you're bellied up to the table doing math.
Yeah.
I think that's what feels most. So my atheist friends who are in the game of meaning making and exploration and curious, courageous, and honest, I feel more kinship with them than I do my Christian friends who are not curious, who are not courageous, and who aren't exploring. I think it's more attitudinal for me than it is propositional anymore in terms of spirituality.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the people that think you're relativistic. I mean, I know that you are the kind of thinker that would be conscientious and maybe even suspicious of your own propensity to project onto the God being what maybe human attributes or just, so by backing off of trying to nail him down or define her down or, whatever, it as something, you have a healthy suspicion of the human need and propensity to just project onto God what we need him to be. And so you're backing off of that more to relativistic descriptors and modifiers. I think that's the more honest way.
I got to thinking, I have an 18-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I got to thinking, if I don't even like using the term spiritual anymore. Human is fine for me. The longer I go, the more humanistic I become. Not in the sense of jettisoning theism, but my theism is deeply humanistic. And Christianity actually has the seeds, in that whole incarnational thing.
I always thought that.
Our whole story is God starts off with this individual human, and one day looks at this human and says, "This isn't good that you're alone." So God describes a human with God as alone. All of us would be so spiritual, we'd be like, "Oh God, we're not alone. We have you, and you're our everything." And
that's a good point.
And God looked at a human and said, "You're alone if you're just with me." And the fix was not to give this human a greater capacity to relate to the supernatural. The fix was to create another human. And when those two humans looked horizontally or laterally at one another, God stepped back in the story and said, "No, that's very good." And then you couple that with incarnation, and you couple that with Jesus at the judgment saying, "I was hungry and you fed me," and we're like, "Wait a minute, we were worshiping you. You were on a throne somewhere." No.
When did we feed you?
Yeah, when did we feed you? As much as you did the least of these. So Christianity actually has the seeds of a very robust and beautiful humanism.
Absolutely.
Which may be the best theism that we could possibly come up with, and the one that God wanted us to have from the beginning, which probably sounds deistic.
No, that sounds theistic.
Yeah, so I just don't think we're that far apart if we would just let that whole fear-based view, the whole existential angst about death and the afterlife, so hijacked the human experience. And until we evolve out of that notion, we really can't even have a decent conversation about this stuff. All of us, Cass, before we got here, the first thing we had to give up was our exclusivism.
Before we got where?
To this place of being able to have this kind of an open conversation, the agnostic conversation.
Yeah, we had to
let go of our fear of hell.
Yeah,
once you let go of the fear of hell and this punishing afterlife and this bifurcated judgment where God separates,
and the pressure to be right.
Yes, I remember A.J. Levine, one of our heroes, saying that one of the great things about Judaism is the tolerance theologically within that realm. I mean, they may throw chairs at one another, but there's not this ultimate divide between even the most orthodox and liberal, because they don't have that sense of hanging over. Their belief system is not the thing that's going to damn them.
Right. The stakes aren't near as high as they are for an evangelical or something.
So, but I think the most damaging thing still on the planet Earth is a fear-based view of God.
Yeah.
And
it brings out the lower angels of our nature or demons of our nature. When we're operating and seeing the situation through the lens of fear, we're always going to make poor decisions.
And so many of our people, honestly, do not believe that at 100% level. But it's insurance.
Yeah.
I pay Gosh, what do we pay for all our insurances? $10,000-$15,000 a year for insurance I don't think I'm ever going to use. Mm-hmm. But I'm avoiding the catastrophic. Yeah. See, that's how religion is. It's that Pascalian wager, but it's really true. I remember when I was like 11 or 12 and I went to this family member's funeral, and they were one of our lost family members that we were always burdened that they were going to hell. Mm-hmm. And we cried about them at every revival, tried to get them to come to church, and good people, but they were just lost because they weren't, Christian, didn't have the Holy Ghost. And I remember at their funeral, man, we wept and wailed, and just, it was terrible. They were in hell now. And then we get them in the ground. 30 minutes later, we're back at the church eating banana pudding and potato salad, acting like there's no tomorrow. I remember thinking, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Uncle so-and-so's in hell.
As
what are y'all doing stuffing your face with fried chicken?
You were a literalist.
And I literally thought to myself, either we're the most selfish, indifferent sons of bitches I've ever met, or we don't believe this.
Yep. That's right. I did the same thing because I thought, how do you just move on?
God,
you literally either you compartmentalize it, but it's cognitive dissonance, and
sure.
You got to go somewhere with it. And so, yeah, I think eventually, deep down, I've said this before, and people are often, in the context of Christians, I said, well, people really don't believe that, and they're like, yeah, they do, or yeah, I do. But
I don't believe that I'm going to get hail damage on my roof this year. I've owned a home for 26 years, and I've gotten it once. So I've got about a 4% chance every year. So I don't believe I'm going to have it. Yeah. But I am going to continue to pay the $90 a month insurance because I can afford that. I can't afford a $17,000 roof replacement.
Right.
It's to avoid the catastrophic, and it's hedging bets.
Yeah, and I think I've said it on the show before, but I think what some of us did was we took Pascal's wager and we flipped it around, because Pascal's wager is saying, play it safe just in case there's a God, then get dipped in water or say the sinner's prayer, get the insurance, get the fire insurance. And what I think what you're talking about is that we turn around and say, wait a second, I'm actually going to put my chips on God being a lot better than that.
Yeah.
And so, not just in case God's an asshole, I'm going to get this insurance. No, I'm betting on God being really cooler than the guy that sends millions of people to hell or whatever. So, just...
But to make that bet, betting on a cold is easier than betting on a cancer. A 20% chance of a cold is no big deal. An 8% chance of a cancer strikes your heart with fear. We had to get to a point where the whole idea of judgment and hell became so abjectly unreasonable, it wasn't even worth $90 a month or one Sunday a month or 3 Sundays a month or whatever it was. And I don't know how you get there. I tell you one thing I don't do anymore is I don't evangelize. When I first started down this trail, I felt like Harriet Tubman, and I had to go get all the other slaves and get them out.
Yeah, me too.
And I feel some sense of responsibility there. But the more peaceful I become with myself, the more I realize, everybody's on their journey. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like evangelizing on this end now like I used to evangelize on the other end. Just walk beside people, and I don't know what they need. Every step that I've taken in this process, I don't think anybody could have exempted me from it. I appreciate the conversations, the books, they've changed me, but I can't look back at any one of them and think that it was the point where I signed on the dotted line and somebody forced me into this. But I think podcasts like this, I don't even have any sense of, boy, I hope this changes somebody's mind. I do have a sense of, I hope it provides somebody somewhere relief that's thinking, oh my God, I'm not crazy.
Or I'm not alone. Yeah.
I'm not alone.
Absolutely. So, getting back to the arc that I was on, you by mentioning A.J. Levine, I was reminded that I was getting ready to unpack that we were colleagues at Vanderbilt Divinity School, and we went through at the same time at different paces. You were taking 2 or 3 courses, and I was taking 5 because I did it in 2 years. How long did it?
I crammed mine. I'm taking my last class. Of course, I did all of my religious education, seminary, all that stuff like 25 years ago in our little Pentecostal world.
Mm-hmm.
And I always was so dissatisfied with that education. Just in my own heart, I always said, when I get my youngest kid in kindergarten, I'm going to go back to a place that I actually would enjoy and be around people I actually agree with. So it was kind of a whim for me. My 11-year-old that's sitting over here on her iPad, she got to kindergarten, and I went to Vanderbilt. This semester is my last class. I have crammed the MTS into 5.5 years.
Crammed?
But it's been great. I found, you and everybody. It's been more of finding a people than it has.
And they've been great people. I love the. We were talking about. We were surrounded by a lot of them were Methodist. You had United Church of Christ, just some more progressive denominations, but there wasn't. I mean, I don't know. They were just the sweetest people, and when I think a lot of times when somebody like myself, has this realization that a lot of what I believed, gave my life to, gave money to, blood, sweat, and tears to, was not all that it was shaken up to be, or then I'm angry that I've been lied to, or that I've thrown away so much of my life. So there's a lot of anger a lot of times when a Christian deconverts. At first, there's a lot of anger at self, at others, et cetera, et cetera. And going to Vanderbilt Divinity School was just, it's hard to be angry at these people because they're so loving and they're so smart. Like, their version of Christianity and their application of it is so pragmatic and so honest and so aligned with science. And, they're not doing near the gymnastics that fundamentalist has to do.
But you have to, from the perspective, especially you have, there's always this question: is liberal Christianity just sentimentally incapable of letting go of something, and are they trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear?
Yeah.
Because they just can't let go.
Lipstick on a pig.
Let's don't forget the fact I am a pastor.
I know, right?
A liberal,
that was
progressive.
You said it, not me.
we're getting there. I asked myself that you cannot not ask yourself that question.
Right.
Phillips Brooks, the great Episcopal preacher back in the late 19th century, he was asked one time, and this guy was brilliant. He was asked by his interlocutor, Brooks, why are you a Christian? And they were waiting on this huge, moving apologetic, and Brooks paused a long time, and then he thoughtfully answered, I think it has something to do with a great aunt of mine who lived in New Jersey. So what part of this for me is that I cannot sentimentally, tribally let go? What part of it for me is, this is simply the face that the hero wears, to use Campbell's term for me.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of us pluralists where it's satisfying to say, when the Mayans sat down with their enemies and made peace instead of bloodshed, and they smoked the peace pipe, that was their communion of saints. We do it with bread and wine, and how dare I say ours is better than theirs, but we're still going to do ours with bread and wine.
Mm-hmm.
We're not Unitarian. We have our distinctives, but we certainly think other people have their distinctives that are just as sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
What part of it is that for me? That this is just my tribal norm and the way of doing it? And what part of it for me is still a sense of conviction that this is not just a meaningful way to do spirituality, but one that can persist and is not like wisdom teeth that we're going to outgrow, but what part of me still really believes in a liberal Christianity?
Mm-hmm.
I remember AJ brought Gerd Ludman to class, and Gerd is this eminent German Jesus scholar that I think AJ even emulates and looks up to. But Gerd was there. Gerd lost his faith years ago in this process. And again, losing faith is such a pejorative way of saying it. Gerd transcended his faith and came to a position of atheism and remained a Jesus scholar. And AJ and him were talking about that in front of this class, this New Testament class we all got to take. And she pressed him on that. And he said that once it no longer made sense for him, liberal Christianity was not satisfying for him because it only seemed that his friends were trying to find allegories and metaphors to maintain something that, again, emotionally they could not let go of.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he said he felt like that was weak-minded and being overwhelmed by emotion.
Mm-hmm.
That question I do ask myself.
Yeah, but I wonder, like, so if we're going to say, all right, these people, progressive Christians, etc., just can't bring themselves to let go of this sentimental thing, and a part of me here on the other side, one who has let go, I don't know. I guess there's maybe you could also ask yourself, what's the point in letting go? I mean, is that a great achievement to let go, or you know?
I think the only reason I would let go is if I felt like it was compromising my own sense of honesty.
Yeah.
And personal congruence.
I totally agree. I would say that's probably why.
And I think
did.
for a guy like you, I mean, you're still, you know, you and I hover on that reverent agnosticism.
Sure.
One of us on the theistic side, one on the non-theistic side.
Right.
But we're neither one of us so far from that fence that we can't see how contiguous our borders are.
Exactly, right.
And I think for you and me, you could probably even sentimentalize and reflect on home and every now and then get wistful about it. I even go back to some of the old Pentecostal services. My theology is not even remotely close to that, and I'll find myself weeping there, having this tribal experience that, you know, is. And I think to myself, am I backslidden? Is this calling me home? And then I get a hold of myself, I'm like, that's not what this is. It's a psychosocial experience that I'm having. But you know how we all say, oh, I miss home, man, the simple thing. And then you go back home, and you're like, I think I'm going to move back to Paragould, Arkansas. And then after about 3 days there, you're pulling your hair out.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do that. I go back to Oklahoma, and I'm like, oh, I remember now why I moved. Yeah. But I feel like that I would probably do that. I'd like to leave here. I mean, I think there's this search for home.
Yeah,
is an inward journey, and we're all on it. So, getting back to your current, getting up to, not back to, your current situation. You're the pastor of a church. We've seen your journey briefly here in a synopsis. In the last 5 years, I mean, when did you go public with being an LGBT affirming church? How recent was that?
That was only in January of 2015.
Okay.
We started the period of discernment. That's the fancy language for we're talking about this in July of 2012.
Wow.
So LGBT inclusion really was almost a secondary issue, and it deserves a primal place just on a level of civil rights. But for us back in 2012, I realized I had been working with a team building that church for 10 years at the time. My vision has always been to produce a progressive, liberal, non-denominational church that had the sensibilities of a mainline with the trappings and stylisms of an evangelical. I thought that was a niche that could really provide a way out for a lot of people. And it wasn't going well because I really was still evangelistic in my mind, and so I was still attracting tons of traditional evangelical people who didn't know what I was trying to do to them. And I could preach with the style and have a service with the style, and I really suppose, arrogance is probably too strong a word, but I was presumptuous, at least misguided. I really felt like it was okay for me to let them come under the guise of one thing, as long as I knew I was trying to change them for the good.
Yeah.
But these are adult people. And I realized, my God, as I reflect back on it, I was still an evangelical. I still had this idea that I've got a better idea than you, and I have a right to change you, without you even asking for it. And in that process, our church was 3 groups of people. We had an incredibly liberal group who understood exactly who I was and what I was saying. We had a conservative group who wasn't hearing at all what I was saying, but liked the way I said it. And then we had a group of deconstructed people in the middle. And those 3 groups were about 700 or 800 people apiece. and the two outside groups did not share a border. You know, the middle group could kind of relate to either.
Yeah.
But those two outside groups, Cass, we were trying to do intimate life together, and they started clashing. You know, on Easter, one Sunday school teacher would be talking about the death of Jesus, tantamount to Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., and then the other teacher right there would be bringing the children underneath the cross to have the blood drip down on them. And they're like, wait a minute, we don't believe it. They're like, what do you mean we don't believe? Well, at GracePoint, what GracePoint are you talking about? Well, Stan says, that's not what Stan says. And I realized I had a mess. And I realized that I had to shift. And I told the leadership, I said, we need an issue to articulate to begin to really show what our hermeneutic is, who we are. And about that time, Westboro Baptist decided to pick at our church because one of our country music star members had made a statement about gay marriage. And I said, here's our issue. So I went at that issue more to show them how we felt about the Bible and God than just that issue. And then, of course, our heart grew for that issue. That hijacked the whole church for a few years. We went LGBT inclusive. Lost 2/3 of our congregation. It was a really difficult time. In the last year and a half, now we've kind of moved past that. That's established. LGBT plus inclusion in our church means that a transgendered person duly qualified could take my place as senior pastor. So that's established. But now the big work for us, which is even more difficult, is moving into a full embrace of what liberal Christianity is and even more liberal spirituality is. And that probably is more inflammatory than even the sexual issue. As you begin to talk about, we're not redefining sexuality now, we're redefining, not defining, we're talking about God. Who is Jesus? Is Jesus the grand exception or a gracious rule? You know, our soteriology and salvation, our bibliology, and, you know, all of that. So that's probably a harder fight for us than the other stuff.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Bible, Christianity, and then the way you talked about it. When people are saying, well, that's not the GracePoint I know, and that's not what I thought, that's not what I think Stan said. And the same things obviously have been done with the Bible, where all of these things become a rope, of which is tug of war, you know, between people who interpret it differently. So you have LGBT people that come to your church.
I suppose our congregation will have 400 people on Sunday, so that means we probably have 800 to 1,000 who call GracePoint home, and I would say 35% of the congregation is LGBT plus.
Yeah. I think, you know, that's probably been a good thing, I think, in some people in the last decade as they came out gay probably felt like they had to make a choice. Not only were they coming out as gay out of the closet, but synonymous, they probably saw that as synonymous with leaving religion.
Yeah.
And, you know, churches like yours and others are saying, all right, so for some of these people that like still want to be Christian, still want to have a relationship with God, still want to keep their faith and be gay, you know, they're, I don't know. Is
One
that
of the harsh realities for a lot of our LGBT community is they finally found a church that was not only affirming but fully accepting and acknowledging of who they were.
Yeah.
Many of them are still conservative Christians.
Yeah.
And now they're facing a year and a half in. I mean, our gay people so have equal rights at our church that they're beginning to have the opportunity to leave.
Yeah.
And they're leaving over issues other than that, which is almost heartening. That a gay couple, it's kind of sad because there aren't a lot of places for them to go like ours. But I tell them, you don't need to be so desperate that you stay here and compromise your convictions.
Yeah.
I mean, our take on biblical inerrancy or substitutional atonement is not satisfying. There are a lot of evangelical gay Christians. So that's been kind of hard, watching them find a home and then be like, oh my goodness. Now what I have found with them is most of them are very elastic, and they are at least willing and open to entertain theological exploration, more so because of what they've had to experience in their own journey. It has given them a capacity that sometimes heterosexuals may not have had.
Yeah. So, what about atheists in your church?
We do have, again, we have lots of people who would refer to themselves as agnostic. They simply don't know. And I rarely meet an atheist who settles into a zero position.
Yeah.
Most of my atheist friends hover somewhere between 3 and 14.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And so there is some sentiment of possibility that there could be a source, out there.
A ground of being.
And those, what I would say is, on that continuum that I constructed, we have no 100s. We don't do well with 100s.
No.
100s do not do well with us.
Yeah.
We don't have zeros. I don't know that zeros and 100s actually exist except in the figment of their own imagination.
Yeah.
But we have lots of people in the single digits and teens in their sense of source or theistic source.
Mm-hmm.
But they love community. They love even the zeitgeist of Jesus and his social action and what Christianity can be there.
Mm-hmm.
And they love more than that, probably. We're not the greatest social activism church. We want to do better there. I think the thing that really scratches their itch there is that a lot of what we do does not feel dissimilar to what you and I are doing right here. It's this. And we're even having to look at our old modalities, our old what we call wineskins in Christianity of worship service, because even our Sunday morning thing is built around this model of you get saved and then you worship the Savior.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is Christian salvation, it's simply helping people recognize they've always been safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no sense that God is a megalomaniac in the sky who wants us to sing over and over to her how wonderful she is. I don't get that. I really want our modality to move into more of that transformational space where we're actually impacting. We are so informational in the church.
Yeah.
You get saved, you worship the Savior, and then you sit around and listen with rapt attention to a guru tell you how to love that Savior better.
Yeah.
As you move into the theology where we are, we're having to re-examine what is even the ecclesial setting. What do we do when we're together? And there are a lot of people who like what we're doing here, and we do a lot of this, and they like community. And
so, have you followed at all the Greta Vosper, the Canadian?
Yeah, Greta actually, when I did the LGBT inclusion thing, reached out to me.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
In no attempt to convert or draw me into the ranks. I knew who she was, and she made that clear. She said, I just want to say on a human level, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Doing this.
Well, she recently was found unfit to serve in the United Church of Canada. And she wrote a book, I think 5 years ago, called With or Without God. So, her congregation, the denomination, everybody's known that she was at best agnostic all this time. And she did lose people in the church, but she gained others. Just like any time a church shifts, you're going to have those kind of turnovers. I have talked to her, I'm friends with her, but this is not putting words in her mouth, but my perspective as one who has been the recipient of thousands of dollars of donations. I had a 501c3 in Oklahoma where money was just flowing in because I'm reaching the lost. I'm reaching out to troubled teens, giving them Jesus, and churches and individuals just want to throw money at that movement. And I've been to Young Life fundraisers where everybody's sitting around in tables and they're hearing what this is doing, and almost as a guilt offering, there's just tons of money in Christendom, and there's buildings and there's people and there's just so much going on. And having left that organization out here in the fucking desert of there's no money, there's no resources, there's no buildings, there's hardly any community. There's certainly not a lot of cohesion. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that you've been there for decades as a pastor with money and resources and people and ideas. And I know that there's a prison ministry that is kind of run out of your church from within
Right.
people in your church. You are doing social justice work, and every church is to some degree. And if like Greta, if you were to go full out, where she is, there's a. I don't, like I said, I don't want to put words in her mouth. I don't know that she has said this, but if I were to relate to her on any level, it would be, hey, if I leave this institution and I find myself on the outside, I'm just going to be trying to reinvent the wheel once I get out there. Everybody in this congregation already practices a very agnostic version of theism, or what you would call a reverent agnosticism. We're good to go. We're paying the mortgage on this church. United Church of Canada churches are closing all around me. Mine's growing. Why not embrace it? And for the headquarters to find her unfit, I felt like was a step backwards, because this is the future. And to leave and then try to figure out how to build community, she's already got a community and she wants to stay, and what's wrong with that? And so I don't know. All of that to say, I don't know if there's a question in there other than I recommend, I kind of like how you've navigated this, because you've kept the machine, you've kept the organization. I found myself on the outside and in many ways was shown the door, and it's lonely out here. And what you've got going, and you and I both have a close personal friend in Chris Hauser. I love the fact that Chris, in his own personal theological journey, has found a place, has found a home where he loves it. He just, and obviously there's hundreds of other people that have done the same. Anyway, I'll shut up and...
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and I still have a sensibility. I really believe, unless I'm lying to myself because I'm scared that I can't make a living any other way, which is always a possibility.
Yeah, Clergy Project's full of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I still have a satisfying sense that life is more than organic, and there is a benevolent mind at the base of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a sense that Jesus Christ captured that consciousness precociously. His virgin birth was just the irrepressible image of God that pulls every now and then at specific places in a gene pool,
mm-hmm.
and spits out these people like him and Pascal and Darwin and Einstein, and they have faculties that we don't have. And I think he did see something that is real, and I still have a sense of that. So I haven't dipped down into the teens yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even where Greta was.
Mm-hmm.
I hit, again, my psychologist friends could say, well, when you hit 50%, it scared you so bad you bounced back because you're just too chicken to take this journey. I don't think I am. I honestly don't think I am. I'm still over here, and I don't feel, I'm the world's worst codependent coming out of the world that I grew up in, but I don't have a sense of pleasing you or pleasing those on the other side of me. I just have a sense anymore of being true to who I am.
There you go, right on.
And I really have a sense of this, so that gives me a little bit more place than Greta had, because I'm still throwing the God term out there romantically and with some sense of passion. But even with that, I do believe, Cass, what you're saying is true. And I think that the community of people that you're a part of are going to eventually find themselves so bereft of community that they're going to realize there were probably 2 or 3 generations that had to overreact against the institution and the organization, and we had so many Pavlovian, just build-up responses to the organization that we had known. We just needed to be clean from it for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that our loneliness is going to finally drive us back together, because when people ask me, do you believe in church, that ecclesial setting where people gather? I'm like, well, I don't know about that, but I do believe in community. And we do art in community, we do athletics in community, we do education in community, we do healthcare in community. There's nothing that we don't do as humans that's not made better by community. Why wouldn't we do our existential, spiritual process in community? Well, I'll tell you why we wouldn't. Some of us, because that community was so pathological and damaging and toxic, we need free of it.
Yeah.
But once I was bemoaning to somebody a few years ago at Vanderbilt how many more conservative Christians there are than liberal Christians. And my professor friend said, that's not true. Conservative Christians go to church at about 20 to 1 the rate of liberal Christians. You're talking about there are more conservative Christians that are in church. Liberal Christians...
Because that's where we can count them.
Yes, liberal Christians so decentralize their faith that I think the first wave of true liberal Christianity doesn't feel the need to go to church anymore because we went out of obligation so long. There's almost kind of this necessary relief of not having to.
Yeah.
And I think when we get through that relief and we get detoxed on what was bad about it, we might circle back around and pick up the good of it.
If we find it safe to return.
If
right?
we find it safe to return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that reminded me when I was listening to that interview with Ryan Bell and Science Mike, and this theism that Mike has developed. It's very nuanced and it's very unique to him and stuff. And I loved it, and I was like, "Good on you, go for it, knock yourself out." But a part of me was like, the general public, and I don't mean this to sound elitist or anything, but the general public doesn't share his IQ. And the fact that he's arrived at this was very hard work, a lot mental stamina and prowess that the general public doesn't hold. And so the fact that their practice or their belief of Christianity is a lot more packaged or mainstream may not be an indictment against their character or whatever. It just may be that's what they can wrap their head around, and that's what works for them. And so to stand in judgment, judgment assumes malice.
Right.
And so if you're a bad person because you have adopted these bad pictures and images of God, that's one thing. But really, it's not always the evil. In fact, it's the good. Like the Christianity that a lot of people hold, they hold because they see it as good and it makes them good and good on them. Or I don't know. I just felt like not everybody can do the gymnastics that Science Mike has done, and so I shouldn't expect Christianity to go there anytime soon.
I even think that sometime about liberal Christianity.
Yeah.
The nuanced way we have to read Scripture, the level of academic erudition that's required to do what liberal Christianity does with the Bible is much more complex than a simple literal read.
Yeah.
And so that's why some of my friends push back when I share with them, this is the way I read Scripture, and it works for me. The mental gymnastics it takes to create that nuanced version with all of its idiosyncrasies, they're like, man, if there is a God who built that system, and you have to understand literature and history and sociology and psychology and myth at that level, golly, what was that God doing? Cutting off 90% of the world?
Yeah.
And I totally get that argument.
So, what do you do for personal recreation or fun? What are some of your hobbies?
Oh, geez. That's, I probably am doing more psychological work these days than theological work because there's a real deficit with becoming a minister at 16. My life probably should end up on one of those e-entertainment specials. Where are the Partridge Family kids now? Because you're a star child as a preacher, and then somewhere around 40 you realize that there's just this gap, and your identity is so consumed with ministry that when people say, "What are the things you do?" I was like, I've been so consumed with being Pastor Stan. I'm just now in the last few years figuring out who Stan is, and
has your shrink or anybody ever told you to lighten up?
Oh, all the time. I mean, my whole process right now,
I get that,
is not going deep; it's lightening up.
Yeah,
and I was with a therapist day before yesterday, and it was just simple: meditate in the morning, and get out in nature, and do something you love. I love going to the gym. so I'm really being careful to go to the gym, and I love walking at Radnor, so I'm walking at Radnor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm actually loving trying to figure out what I love right now.
That is, honestly, that's in a nutshell, like my wife would just concur so deeply. Our post-theistic journey together, that's where she's at. It's like she's discovering, and I did too, and still am, not only who am I, but what do I want? Because the whole denial of self was so thorough.
God. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
What a pathological system.
Exactly.
But I think we got to be careful not to look back at it with, too much ire and aversion, because it's human evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, we believe the gods were angry.
Yeah.
If the gods are angry and we had substance to believe that, it makes sense that entire systems were built to try to resolve that anger.
Yeah.
And I think the ultimate seeds of Christianity are don't be afraid, and perfect love casts out all fear, even the fear of God. And I think the ultimate essence of Christian spirituality is letting go of Jesus. And that's exactly what Jesus said to Mary Magdalene. Out of the resurrection, she wraps him up and says, "I'm never letting you go again." First words out of his mouth, "Let me go."
Mm-hmm.
And
isn't it Pete Holmes who says that to lose your life, you have to lose your life to find it? And he kind of spins that to, he had to lose his faith to find it.
Yeah, I think Jesus never wanted a religion built around him, whatever that idea of Jesus is.
Yeah.
It was not to build a religion around. I don't think Jesus came to show us who God was. I think Jesus came, like all the greats, come to show us who we are.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful now to find spirituality in lightening up and enjoying. What H.L. Mencken said, Puritanism is the haunting fear that somebody somewhere is having a good time.
That is awesome.
Back to that thing that I said in the beginning. God looked at Adam and said, "You're alone." And the resolve of human aloneness is not to make them more capable of relating to God. The resolve of human aloneness was to create another human being. And I don't think, whatever God is, I don't see that God as dominating the game and showing up and wanting to be the center of our attention. Mm-hmm. I think a robust and loving humanism is about the best thing we could do to satisfy what God's original intent was.
Yeah. So just to be clear for our listeners, do you believe in a literal Adam and Eve?
Oh, God, no.
Okay, just checking.
Somebody said the other day, they said, "Do you believe in Adam and Eve?" And I said, well, I don't believe in, that's a historical, literal thing. I talk about them the way I talk about, Paul Bunyan.
It's a wonderful story, and you've already referenced it twice today.
They said, well, they were just scandalized that I didn't. I said, listen, I believe in them more than you do.
Woo!
You think 2 people lived that story. I think 10 billion have lived that story.
Yeah, right.
It's not facts that will set you free. It's truth that will set you free.
Yeah.
And every one of us are born naked and not ashamed, and a serpent slithers into the garden. And, it's our story.
There is a version, there is a Jesus that is subversive to the whole judgment, like we got to throw our babies in the volcano to appease the wrathful sky daddy. There is a Jesus that is, if picked out accordingly, is throws that up on its head.
And I even think substitutionary penal atonement was a brilliant theological spiritual innovation in the first century.
Yeah.
For the first century interpreters of Jesus' life to appropriate him as an ultimate sacrifice, brilliant.
Yeah.
But why?
Especially tribal conflict. They could
Absolutely.
say, we've all hurt each other. You've wronged me, I've wronged you. Let's put these wrongs on this goat and slit its throat or send it into the woods. And then maybe we can clean slate with each other.
Right. Exactly. It's scapegoat, substitutionary penal atonement in a broadly sacrificial world 2,000 years ago is brilliant. Ptolemy was brilliant.
What's Ptolemy?
One of the original astronomers, Greek astronomers, that believed in a 3-tiered universe.
Oh, I see.
The problem with orthodoxy and Christianity and a lot of religions is we have said the first interpreters of Jesus' life were the archetype. I say they were the infant. They were the first
Yeah.
interpreters. Once you make them, but we don't do that in botany, biochemistry, economics. Every discipline known to man is growing, and we're exploring and we're researching. And yet this one vital one about God, we say the best ideas were developed 2,000 years ago and are now fixed. Well, that's ridiculous.
When I was a Christian, God was against the building of stone buildings. The Canaanites built stone buildings. My people are going to live in tents because they're mobile. And I just totally grabbed onto that as far as landing on a doctrine or landing on a belief or hitting a plateau and saying, I've arrived, and building a concrete structure. And then, when the cloud moves, you're stuck. So you literally have to stay mobile. I got that. And that was a Christianity so I allowed my Christianity to evolve. Secondly, the wineskin metaphor.
Yeah.
A wineskin, a goat skin that has been used before is dry, crusty, and hard as a rock. And so when you put wine in it, and grape juice in it, and it expands, it's gonna break. So it has to be a unused, freshly tanned goat skin that has some flexibility to it. My gosh, right there. I mean, these are two metaphors from the Bible that says, evolve with me.
Right. I mean, what Jesus say the night before he was crucified in John's gospel, he said, I have many things to tell you. You can't bear them now.
Yeah, you're not ready for this.
You're not ready. And there's no asterisk there that says, but it was all completed by the end of the 1st century or the 7th century.
Yeah.
I mean, the work of Jesus through Spirit is, as human consciousness grows, I will say things to you that are not a change of the divine mind, but you're finally ready to hear them. We do that with our kids.
Yeah.
Why did we fix human capacity by the end of the 1st century on spiritual matters? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's control, and it's ineffectual.
I've heard a lot of people these days. I can't remember his last name right now. His name's Michael. He's kind of an evolutionary guy. He goes around and teaches. But anyway, a lot of these people. I think even Science Mike said this the other day, and I think I've heard Pete Holmes. I'm dropping the same names from previous conversations, but basically, when it comes to the word God or the office of God or that which we hold as God, a lot of people are using this term reality. So when science says this is real, instead of digging in your heels and saying, nope, that contradicts what I think of God, it becomes God. Like you literally go, okay, that's what science and honesty and truth is revealing as fact. There's my God. I mean, I have to believe that as we unveil the truth, we're unveiling God, and if I'm stuck in one place, then I'm going to miss God.
As Gerald Massey, an Egyptologist, said, I finally realized authority is not truth. Truth is authority. And the quest for truth, if you do it, I'm teaching my kids the spiritual virtues, the human virtues that I want for you are almost in this order: honesty, courage, curiosity, humility, gratitude, and then love. And if you don't have honesty, what do you have? If you can't even be honest in your own inquiry, you have nothing. But once you're honest and open, then you got to be courageous, because it's going to be a scary world out there that's going to confront, your norms. And then I really push the third one, and that is an inquisitive spirit and curious. But if you've got courage and you can be curious, but orthodoxy never encouraged curiosity. It's fixed.
Right.
Believe this, pass the baton on. And that type of religion, it may be thousands of more years, but that type of evolution is like wisdom teeth and appendixes. We're evolving out of it.
Yeah. Humans, your kids, my kids, all of us are going to navigate life. It's somewhat of a maze, or a word for labyrinth. And there's going to be hedges and jungles and caves and dark places. And what we used to say, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And so the Bible became our flashlight to help us make decisions at a fork in the road. We shine, and we say, okay, then we know where to go. And honestly, I think honesty is that flashlight now.
Yeah.
That if we're going to navigate our life, and you're wanting the kids to make choices and decisions that help them prosper and thrive and be happy and whole, then the way to find those paths when there's 3 or 4 options is not to lie to yourself, or not to cover your eyes, cover your ears, see no evil, speak no evil. Like, no, open up and say yes. This is not what I want. This is not what I wish was true, but it's what's true. And anyway, I just think that's so. My new Brian Bell's doing a thing that's kind of hashtag Better Bible, and so we're rewriting scriptures. And so I would take that one. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and I would say honesty is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Which, in a way, if you want to go to John chapter 1, the Logos is the light unto my feet. You're still talking about at least a fluid and mobile pursuit of truth.
The truth will set you free.
I still believe that. I say it all the time.
David Foster Wallace said the truth will set you free, but first it very well may have its way with you.
Yeah.
And I said the other day, the truth will set you free, but sometime you've got to set it free in your own heart.
Did you by chance read Infinite Jest, or at least try to?
No.
It's huge, and it's amazing. I have tried, and I can't wrap my head around it, but he was fascinating. Anyway, so when it comes to what do you do for recreation,
I lift weights, I go to the gym, I go to Radnor and walk, and I am presently a 48-year-old person looking and open for hobbies.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd love to do it again. This is fun. This is spiritual food for me. If I didn't have a job, I wouldn't have to go to church tomorrow.
Yeah, we just had church. So there's my talk with Stan Mitchell, pastor of GracePoint Church in Franklin, Tennessee.
Right. Interesting. I didn't really know. I listened just as a listener. I wasn't listening for any other reason. You suggested I listened, and I didn't know where he was coming from early on. I couldn't tell if he was, sort of a born-again, excited, angry Christian. But then as the interview kind of wore on, it became pretty clear he's a sort of a progressive Christian. Yep. And you went to school with him. I didn't know that at Vandy.
Yep.
And
well, what you maybe were experiencing is that the timeline of his trajectory was he was born into Oneness Pentecostal.
Right.
Which, this is a church that regards all other sects and denominations of Christianity lost. Wow. So the trajectory was angry God.
Yeah. Sure.
An exclusive God. And I think maybe they were going on the 144,000. As far as it's a narrow is the gate.
Right.
Jesus himself said, few find it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scripture that support this very, very narrow, exclusive, judgy pinhole that you've got to squeeze through, and you'll be lucky if you're one of the 144, or you get. And then when I contrasted my Christianity, which was, I wanted to be God's best friend, and I wanted to be God's favorite pet child or pet partner. And I thought, I wanted him to be proud of me. So it was loving, and it was paternal, and I didn't have a dad. He died when I was 17 and had this big daddy hole. So my affection towards my Heavenly Father was really pronounced because of the lack of fatherly figure in my life.
Yeah.
And then when he said, well, your version is much warmer. And I remember talking with a Muslim once, and I was picking their brain about their God. And the word love is not an adjective in the Quran for God. The Bible says God is love. The Quran, they don't associate, and it's more like Stan's childhood, they don't associate love at all with Allah. It's just divine overseer, and mad and angry and judgmental, and thus the bowing 3 times a day, the subversive. If just by appearance, if you just watch a Muslim service or whatever, you just talk to them about how they see God as like, if you're in Kim Jong-un's Congress and you fall asleep in the room, he's going to kill you. He's done it. Mm-hmm. And so there's this tiptoe around Kim Jong-un, in that whole country. And that's the God that I think that many Muslims serve. It's the God that many Christians serve. So anyway, long story, just to show you the trajectory that he did a lot of deconstructing of that.
Right.
And it took a long time. I mean, Max Lucado, you're probably not familiar with. But
I've heard the name, yeah.
All about grace. Mm-hmm. And a very warm and fuzzy writer, especially for Church of Christ, which is kind of stoic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But he came out and bestseller. I mean, I used to work Christian bookstores, and his books would fly off the shelf every time he put one out. It was a sure thing. Mm-hmm. Grace. And, I was thinking about a song yesterday. Can't remember his name, but he did a song called When God Ran. Mm-hmm. And then he ran to me, took me in his arms, put my head to his chest, said, my son's come home again. Prodigal son story.
Okay, yeah.
And the chorus is When God Ran. So because God stood up on the porch, saw his son, and ran to him. And so that sentiment of, I'm a special child of God, that warmth. And so this Max Lucado book was a completely different, really, a different Jesus, different God, different Christianity, and it was contraband to him. So anyway, all of that to say that's the trajectory that I think you witnessed in the show, because as the show goes on, you get to realize, oh my gosh, he's really unpacked a lot.
Yeah, he did, absolutely. And this notion of reverent agnosticism, on one hand, I say, well, that's kind of nice, that's thoughtful, but it still gives Christianity, or really religion in general, sort of a break, a pass, rather than going, well, that's kind of nutty that you think that. You have to go, oh, okay, yeah, and just shut up and be quiet because you're respecting this guy or this person, even though he or she doesn't respect you at all.
Yeah,
So I mean, I get it, but I'm not too sure about that one.
In some ways, Bob, there's no way that you can get it.
Well, it's probably true.
No, and here's what I mean is that
intellectually, I get it. Anyway.
Intellectually, you do.
Yeah.
Emotionally,
not
here's
so
the
much.
thing: is that let's just say that all of us ex-Christians, that we were all married in a wonderful marriage, and deeply in love with our spouse. At least at one point in the marriage, it was just beautiful and deep, and day after day after day, week, month, years of tears, of goosebumps, of feeling the presence of God, of engaging with God, all the time thinking, absolutely, in our hearts, 100%, that we are interacting with the divine.
Okay.
No questions asked. And it is like an opiate, like a good high, a good acid trip, not a bad one, but a good one, is surreal. It's magical. And I got goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I wouldn't understand that.
And so that when you break up with that spouse, or that spouse turns out to be a lie, or whatever.
Imaginary or whatever. Yeah, right.
Then you're left with a big hole in your heart. And giving up Jesus. I mean, when we're talking about Reverent agnosticism or any of the other Christians that we've had on that keep Jesus on a life support.
That's right.
It's the inability to pull the plug. It's the inability to say no. Because some of what happened, a lot of what happened in those years of allegiance and loyalty to Christianity, some significant things happened. And it's really hard to say that it happened, but it was mindfuckery, or it was trickery, or it was emotionalism, or whatever. So, and I guess that brings us to our point, is that Stan is at least, and I make reference to the interview that Ryan Bell did with Science Mike.
Yes.
And both Science Mike and Stan are sitting here willing to say, yeah, there's a chance that this is sentimentalism. There's a chance that I just don't have the courage.
Right.
And even, I think Stan even said if there comes a day when I can't maintain my own personal honest integrity and stay Christian, then I'm going to put a fork in it. But until then, which he's saying I'm not there yet.
Right.
I think there's still something about, what he made reference to, a mind behind it all.
Yeah.
And a very ambiguous God. Anyway.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, I've read John Shelby Spong, almost everything he's written. So I get the notion that we've got to think about this thing in a whole different way. But even, Spong goes much further than Stan does. Stan is still but caught up in the...
Who do we have on recently that was disappointed that Spong didn't go far enough?
Oh, well, right.
That's true. This spectrum... we can all look to our right and left and say, you're not as far as me, or you're not as brave as me, or whatever.
Yeah.
The other thing, not just the emotionalism, is that even though Jesus didn't say or write anything personally that we know of, everything was hearsay, there's some good stuff in there occasionally.
Sure.
And so I think there's an attempt to say, Jesus was, and Stan does, but he also parenthetically adds, like all master teachers who've ever come to earth.
That's true. Right.
He has revealed some things that helped humanity evolve. So it's tough. I read an article this week, and just to be candid with the audience, I sent it to you.
Right.
And asked you to read it. And Phil Torres, is the new atheist movement irrelevant? And it's on a site called Quillette. How do you say that? Quillette or Quillette?
Well, either Quillette or Quillette. Yeah. Quillette.
A platform for free thought. It was September 23rd, 2016 article. Is the new atheist movement irrelevant? And he says, yes, more than ever.
Yeah, and that's weird, because if you were to see that headline and then read the first couple of paragraphs, you would go, oh, I see. He doesn't think it's that important because, Hitch is dead.
Yeah.
And, they haven't been in the news as much, the Four Horsemen and what have you.
Yeah, not putting out any new books.
Right. And then you go down a little bit later, and it's like, but the atheist movement is really important. It's really an important thing. We can't let it go, is what
that's what he's saying.
What he's up to.
He's basically, it's like when your coach comes in and he says, y'all suck. He's trying to motivate you to play harder.
Yeah, well,
so he starts out with y'all suck. That you're more irrelevant now than ever.
Right, exactly.
However, here's some stats that show the growth of Islam, the growth of Christianity,
right,
and the growth of extremism.
Right.
And I think there's always, anytime that you have hardship, like economies are failing, or war-torn countries, or even refugees and diaspora, people displaced. You have the platform and the bed, the garden bed to produce a lot of rebellion, dissent, or rioting. So yeah.
Yeah, that's what I got as well. There's one paragraph that's pretty good. He says, it's worth mentioning some statistics that aren't directly related to religion but are nonetheless relevant to our prosperity and survival. According to psychologist Martha Stout, around 4% of humanity suffers from sociopathy. There are sociopaths. 4% of the population are sociopaths. They don't really know the difference between wrong or right.
Yeah.
That is mind-blowing right there. I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, when we see these, crazy people shooting up, dressing up like the Joker and shooting people in a theater and then laughing about it or whatever, we know that they're being hauled off in cuffs. We know that's a psychopath, that's a sociopath, with zero empathy and zero cognitive or emotional connection or empathy to the victims that he just killed or whatever.
Sure.
Zero.
Yeah.
No one's home. The lights are on, no one's home.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know. I mean, that's a big percentage.
Yeah, and from there he goes, let's see, this yields to about 296 million sociopaths roaming the planet and 372 million by 2050, which isn't too far away. But not a disproportionate number of criminals or sociopaths, maybe 25% of the prison population. But this is an alarming situation, Torres says, given the ongoing democratization and science and proliferation of doomsday machines. And he does talk about that too, how easy it is to build a bomb and to kill people and and what have you. So it's important to have a counterbalance, to these ideas, rather than just have them out there. An atheist suggestion or whatever thought is a good thing to have. And how are we going to keep it up? Is pretty much his question.
When I was a Christian, Paul wrote, and he said, "Be ready in and out of season to give an account for the hope that you have." So it was basically an appeal to apologetics.
Right.
And I think that it's worthwhile to have your elevator speech. I mean, for why you're an atheist, or how has atheism enhanced your life, or something to where we're kind of trying to sell it sometimes, or at least have it in your repertoire.
That kind of makes sense. And I think it goes along with Stan, because Stan said, this isn't going to change like overnight. Nothing's going to change that fast.
No.
So, there's a point being made. People, tribes, as he called them, have to go somewhere. Yeah.
Well, and a couple of things there. One, he was basically saying that I think he was implying that a lot of atheists have overreacted to their disdain for the church. And once they their emotions settle and they get lonely again, they'll be back.
Right.
There was somewhat of an implication of that.
That's right.
But what it might have been was atheists and post-Christians are going to figure out a way to recreate community, like Greta Vosper. I mean, and even he himself is doing something that is, like I said, is on this spectrum. It's a stair step away. Now, I think it's significant, the point that you just made, that he made, is that it's not going to happen. It's going to be a couple of generations at least.
At least, yeah.
Before, if we're talking about the annihilation of religion, we're talking about hundreds of years, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
To where, just like everybody laughs about Zeus today. So it's 100%. Zeus is dead. And Greek mythology is not believed probably by one person on the planet. So there are religions and there are ideologies and philosophies that are dead. So it's possible new ones might pop up, just like Christianity did or whatever. But anyway, the point being is, if it's going to take a while,
right,
and we still have to live, and people still have to be, at least pursue happiness, then this is a context in where I could say, good on you, Stan, for doing a church that's a stepping stone church like this.
It's an evolution,
sort of, an
evolving church.
Yeah. So, but back to this article by Torres, he says religious moderates embolden religious extremists by reinforcing the acceptability of bad epistemological habits of thought.
Right. Yeah, but that's like the same thing that who was the big atheist we had on?
Silverman.
Silverman, yeah.
He says the exact same thing.
Yeah, and he's real firebrand about it too. He wants you to go up into people's faces and tell them that.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah. He has his times where he's like, no, but it's only like if you're a kid living in your house and you're dependent on your parents.
Oh, okay.
For money. It's not the time to tell them or to attack their version of religion or whatever. Sure. There are times where he does endorse to keep your mouth shut, but most of the time, other than that,
he's out there. That's
so
for sure.
I'm going to play an excerpt from Pete Holmes' show. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing about Stan. I thought was really significant. Maybe I'd heard this before. It seems like I have, but yet it struck me like new. That's brilliant, and that is. When people confront him and say, "You don't believe in Adam and Eve," he says, "I believe in them more than you do, because you just believe in two people."
Yes.
I think it's a metaphor that applies to every human that's ever walked the earth.
Right.
As far as the shame of nakedness, or what happens to you when you lose your innocence and you choose to become a judge of what is good and what is evil. You go from childlikeness of naivete, So it's this powerful metaphorical picture that does illustrate some attributes of human psychology.
Yeah, and that's what Rabbi Rami says too.
Absolutely.
It's
but
exactly
that phrase, "I believe in them more than you do."
Yeah.
See, I could say that.
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm just like him in that sense. I don't believe in a literal two people.
Right.
But I absolutely love the story. And I could talk about the story ad nauseum. I mean, it's packed with metaphor. Yeah, right. I believe in them more than you do. I just thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, really well done. Yeah.
So this is a little bitty conversation, a bit of a conversation, like a 2-hour conversation. I took 21 minutes of it. Pete Holmes and Hasan Minhaj, correspondent for The Daily Show, both comedians, and they're talking about this spectrum of within the comedic world. Some comedians just want to burn the house down of Christianity, destroy religion, just completely ridicule Islam, all of this. Others kind of want to dance with it and be nice with it, and others are devout. Very few.
Yeah,
you won't find very devout religious people in the comedic world. But anyway, so it's an interesting talk, and I just want to throw it in here without comment. I mean, I'm just going to end the show with it.
Yeah, let it roll.
Let it roll.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next week.
All right, thanks, Ken.
Times in my life I remember being like, I want to tell you about Jesus, but I was never very good at it.
Really?
Because what's a 15-year-old kid? What the fuck am I talking about?
Yeah.
You have to lose your life to get it. So at that point I'd get to lose it. I only became interesting spiritually, if I ever did, after I lost my faith and then started putting it back together.
I'd agree with that.
Right?
Because at that point you were just running off of what you were pre-programmed with.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the heroes. It's like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. You haven't left the Shire.
Did it ever get you... I could never square the circle in the sense that I just always felt I'm a spiritual person. What I've never liked is still, it goes back to this tribalism version, especially in like the Abrahamic faiths of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. To me, it's like PS1, PS2, PS3, right? Like, especially with Islam, it's like backwards compatible. It's like, oh, we acknowledge the
Christ
Bible
the
stuff
prophet.
and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right. But what I don't like is this idea of like, but still, you got to go with PS3.
Yeah.
And then other people are like, no, but still, you got to go with PlayStation 2. No, PlayStation 1 is the way to go. Then there's like Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever, and they're like, why? What's wrong with Xbox? What's wrong with Atari? What's wrong with blah, 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 right?
A friend of mine back in Chicago, Dave Odd, had a funny bit about how it was like the Star Wars trilogies, like Judaism was A New Hope, and then like Empire was Christianity.
Hari Kondabolu has the Back to the Future joke.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And then,
there is only one Back to the Future. That's like one of the funny tags from it.
And then he goes, and Mormonism is the weird straight to VHS Ewok movies. Like a really great line like that.
Right.
But you know, I'm reading this book by Richard Rohr, which I highly recommend, called Everything Belongs.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like what I'm talking about. Whereas I used to like want to eradicate through love and peace and all the Christian niceness I could muster atheists. Or I'm sure at some point in my life I would have met a Muslim and been like, all right, let's bring you from 3 to 2 because you need to be in the 2 soup.
Yeah,
and he said this thing. He was like, we took this thing, this experience and this energy that can be merged with and can flow with. And I'm just talking about awareness. Like the Hebrew God, I am, just beingness and being in the flow of that or not being in the flow of that. And we turned it into being right. And isn't that what human beings do? Talk about tribalism again.
Yeah.
We take these things and we go, every church thinks they have the one truth and they think everybody else is wrong.
Right.
But nobody steps out, nobody zooms out to go, well, if we think we're the only ones right and they think they're the only ones that are right, like we need to talk about this. Like this can't be what the world is.
Yeah.
Or you're in a cult and you kill yourself wearing Nikes because you are the only ones. You know what I mean? Like it gets very toxic. But that's what human beings do. That's why I think spirituality is a heart place, not a head place. I spent so much of my life trying to rationalize going, but did Jesus really do this? And now I go, it's a story, and stories have a way of...
Have you had Reza Aslan on this podcast?
Who?
Reza Aslan.
No.
He wrote Zealot, the New York Times bestselling book Zealot. You gotta have him.
Yeah, I'd love to have him.
He has this book called No God But God, but it's so dope because he's reiterating the exact point you're making. He's like, does it even matter?
It doesn't matter.
Question mark. And it does it like...
I made this point recently. I do these shows with Rob Bell, who's a spiritual teacher, and I made the point. I was listening to this Ray Charles song, and he says, "I'm going to love you, baby, come rain or come shine." And whenever we hear that, we go, no one hearing that thinks Ray Charles means I'll love you when it's raining and when it's dry out. We know he means in good times and in bad, because we know how to listen to music.
Yeah.
And then we're so far removed from people who knew how to read the Bible.
Yeah.
But we're going around going like, he said it, I believe it, that does it.
It's like literally X, Y, and Z.
That's
and
right.
I'm like, come on.
We westernized it.
Yeah.
And then we took something that belongs in the both and trans-rational place, and we put it up in our heads.
Right.
And of course, the next most Western thing to do is to go, we have it, we're in, you're out. We got it, you're bad. We're good, you're evil. We're heaven, you're hell.
Yeah.
When it was never about that.
Yeah.
Shit like this doesn't survive if it's just that stupid binary, if there's no mystery, if there's no pulse to it.
Okay. So we're on the same page, right? But why are like 98% of comics like burn it all down, burn them?
I think that's our job. When I was watching the Tony Robbins documentary, did you watch that?
Yeah. Oh my God. How did you feel about that?
I really like Tony Robbins. I would never go to one of his events because it reminds me of evangelical Christianity.
They should have called that documentary "It's Your Dad's Fault."
Neil Brennan, I saw him at a party last night. He was like, he does bully crowd work. And for people like us that do crowd work, you can kind of see the way that people in front of large groups of people will agree. It's a little bit like a cold reading or something.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's not right some of the time, but it's show business. Make no mistake. It's show business. Yeah. I'm sure he knows that.
Yeah.
But the main thing that I took away from that is thank God I'm a comedian, because at the back of an evangelical revival, at the back of a Tony Robbins seminar, there have to be people leaning in the back, and Tony's up there. God love him. I'm really a huge fan of his.
Yeah.
And you're a Midwestern woman named Deb, and you want to start a cookie business where everything's peanut butter, and then you add to that. And he's like, you got to do that. Make a list of why your cookies are the best fucking cookies in the world. And zoom back and pan back to the comedians, and we're at a table going, Deb, your cookies probably fucking suck ass. So essential. You need both. Some of these people, they get their lives saved. They have their visions restored, and everything turns around for them because they needed someone to cradle them and love them.
Sure.
Because they weren't given that fundamental arithmetic when they were children or in their adolescence. But society also needs, and in that moment I would revert instantly back to my comedian side.
Yeah.
Going back to Eminem, we need different sides to our persona.
Yeah.
Like Jung says, we need to be okay with our shadows. We need to be okay with our egos. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody's different people. So I snap back into comedian and be like, this is some fucking bullshit.
Right.
Because that's our job.
Yeah.
And a lot of our people, comedians, take that and really run with it because it's so fucking fun to burn everything down.
Right.
But to quote Rob Bell, any old donkey can tear down a barn, but it takes a special donkey to build one.
Right.
And that's where I'm at. I'm like, it's fun to donkey kick the barn of religion down.
Yeah.
But to me, 37 years old and having studied this for who knows how many years, I'm like, it's far more interesting to hear somebody and go like, what are you getting out of this? What moves you? We all know what it feels like when you've just made love or heard an amazing song or heard an amazing speech or heard an amazing slam poet.
Yeah.
And you transcend and you're in the now and you're seeing beauty and you're seeing pain and you're accepting it all. Because that's what the heart does. It opens up and it lets everything in. Right. The brain can only handle so much suffering. The brain can only handle so much beauty. So we shut it down.
Yeah.
We make the world look flat and boring, and we ignore Black Lives Matter. We ignore Syria. We ignore whatever the issues are because the head can't handle it. But sometimes in those moments, the heart would only expand and does something that your brain can't do and widens the fuck out and eats it all.
But I believe that's when like humanity is at its best. Like that's like.
But that's what I'm talking about.
This is when we truly are the chosen people, right?
That's what. But I would say the body of Christ.
Sure.
Every religion has a word for this.
Sure.
The Jews is Shekinah, the idea of being with God, being in that thoughtless place where for one fucking second you can stop thinking about what I need, what I deserve, what's fair, who's fat, who's skinny, who's tall, who's thin, who do I want to fuck, who do I want to fuck me, what am I going to eat? And in 1 second, we've all done that, standing in the ocean, at a wedding, whatever it might be, suddenly you're outside of it. And that's maybe my life's passion, is trying to spend more time dipped in
those moments,
And you know it.
Sure.
The wall and winners and losers and Trump, I'll make it political, that's not the body of Christ. That's not the chosen people.
Man, I agree. My uncle dropped this gem on me, which was one of the... It was crazy. He's in India. He calls me. I try to call my family as much as possible. But he's just talking to me about life. He's just worried about me. He's seeing stuff on the news, and he's like, how are things? You know, blah, blah, blah. Are you getting heat from the media? Some of the I saw what you did at the Republican National Convention. Don't get hurt. All that stuff. He cares.
Yeah.
Calls me, and he's just like, he says this thing to me, and he was like, he's like, deep down in all of us, I'll be honest with you, no matter what country you're in, there's this ugly little whisper that like exists in our souls that just wants us to be with our own kind. Mm-hmm. Whether it's like a socioeconomic thing, where you grew up thing, a color thing, a language thing. And he's just like, Trump has tapped into that whisper and legitimized it. So whether he loses or not is irrelevant. He's opened up the Kraken to be like, no, this is a legitimate feeling that you should have.
He hasn't released it yet, but he opened it up.
Yeah.
It's our job to release it.
Yeah.
Let's not release it.
Let's not do that. But I believe that's so true, that when those ugly whispers are there and we like legitimize them, I am really embarrassed to be like a human being.
Well, can't you admit, if I can admit that I don't share a moving slam poem about the black experience?
Sure.
And maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I'm feeling a little bit like a coward, and I'm not sure if I did or didn't.
Okay.
But I know I haven't at some points because I'm like, I'm white, I can't do this. If you went to school and it was all white people and you saw another brown guy, wouldn't you want to go and eat lunch with him potentially, or at least say hello to him?
I would do that out of a marginalization thing.
Interesting.
I'm worried for you. Are you okay? For real?
No, I believe you. I
Are you
completely
alone?
believe
Are
you.
people making fun of your name? What's your name? I can pronounce your name. It'll be okay. Come here. Do this. Because I know it might be tough for you.
Yeah.
And then if he's fine, if he's safe, cool. Like, do you know
Moving
what I mean?
on.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like, I look at Kumail like a brother. I look out, like, I want him to succeed. I want his movie to do well.
It's going to do great. It's so good.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I want him to win.
Oh, so I thought you were going to say, I also look at Kyle Kinane as my brother. You're saying because Kumail's
From a marginalization issue, right?
I hear that.
I feel like Kyle will be okay. But even if if I knew Kyle was hurting, Kyle sometimes is hurting. Then I'm like, Kyle, man, are you all right, man?
the
Are you
Eddie
good?"
Murphy bit where whenever his mom would see a white homeless person, she'd go, no need for
No
that.
need for that. Yeah. Or was it no? Is it no need for that or no excuse for that?
I think it's no need. No need for that. So terrible.
But yeah, so yeah, that's my thing, man. It's crazy.
Well, I get that.
What about?
And I wasn't trying to trap you.
No. Let's move.
But when I was in high school, if I saw someone praying over their lunch, I would go and talk to them because I'd go, oh, there's another one. So I'm trying to talk to the whisper thing. Because there is, I remember on NPR they talked about all Indian retirement communities. Have you heard about this?
No.
Because at the beginning of life and at the end of life are the times when we want to be surrounded by people that look and behave like we do.
Okay.
So when you get older,
Yeah.
I'm not saying this for you, but statistically, I suppose, there's
Sure.
a chance that 85-year-old Hasan Minhaj is going to be like, fuck it, get me some brown people that like the spinach stuff very spicy.
Yeah.
So they also talk about how after tragedies, those feelings go up. So 9/11, weren't we all American?
Yeah.
The Boston Marathon bombing, weren't we? I'm from Boston, and suddenly I was so fucking from Boston. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these things, like whenever we're reminded of our death, for better or worse, this
Right.
is just science.
Right.
Science, baby.
Yeah.
Some people feel a very strong pull towards, quote unquote, their own kind.
Right.
I find that very interesting.
But that emotion can be stirred for good
Of
or
course.
for evil.
Well, the right means used by the wrong people end up with the right means being used for the wrong reasons.
Sure.
And that's what it is. These can be good things, but they can be horribly misused.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So let me take it beyond the slam poetry thing.
Yeah.
Because I was like, yeah, the world could use a retweet of slam poetry. But let's say Ta-Nehisi Coates writes this great article on The Atlantic called The Case for Reparations. Ta-Nehisi Coates, amazing author, Between the World and Me, phenomenal author, right? He's also writing New Black Panther. He wrote this article called The Case for Reparations. To me, that deserves more retweets from that 67% that I'm referring to than the slam poetry.
Interesting.
Look, man, I mean, Russell Simmons probably appreciates that retweet. But you know what I mean? Now, is that so heavy that, just be real, is it like, dude, this is just so heavy? And is it so ugly
It feels like
to
a
look
wolf tweeting a sheep post.
It's interesting.
In some sort of I'm not saying that's right,
Neil
by the way.
Brennan has this theory that it's so ugly. It's so ugly to look at, like the weight of the blood that this country was built on, like eviscerating and annihilating the native population, then enslaving black people for 200 plus years to literally build the infrastructure of this country. Then kind of what we're doing to Mexican Americans now of like, just pick our strawberries and just like feed us and then we won't look at you. It's too ugly to look at.
Yep.
And it's too ugly to acknowledge.
But
So Game of Thrones on Sunday is a lot better. And oh man, that soundtrack for Stranger Things though, dude, the synths. Like that's way easier. Oh, that Vulture article about the synths, and it's way easier to get into that.
Of course.
Than to be like this ugly.
We're constantly distracting ourselves from the pain of reality. Constantly. I would add the fact that we love animals, but we're eating them constantly.
Right.
As another type of...
Right.
I know human beings are certainly more valuable. This is a cultural belief. I happen to think life is good in all its forms.
Sure, yeah.
But I think there's a lot of pain that we're ignoring, and it's not a cow, it's beef, and it's not beef, it's a quarter pounder, and shut the fuck up. So there's a lot of... And these clothes were made by children.
Yeah.
And my phone was made by slaves in China.
Yeah, it's like, where do you draw the line? No, I get it.
How many things can you let in? The brain can only handle so much.
Yeah.
That's why the work is to open your heart. That's where spiritual practice comes in, where you can be joyful even while you're with someone who's dying unjustly, because the heart can handle it, but the head, it's going to break if you try and absorb everything. And that's why I would rather talk about the synths in Stranger Things.
Because you have an empathy ceiling in your head.
You have a beauty ceiling, you have an empathy ceiling. You can only handle so much. That's why we're living in this reality. This is the one we've constructed.
Okay.
You can't handle it.
So if I wanted people in America to care about that boy in Aleppo, you know, the one with the dust on his face.
Yeah.
And Sarah Silverman has this joke: if we replaced that boy with a puppy, like she was like, we'd figure it out. We would fix it.
Yeah.
It's like a classic Sarah Silverman joke. How can I tap in and let this be a floor in your empathy apartment complex?
Yeah.
You still have room for it. So Stranger Things can still be there. And Luke Cage on Netflix coming out next week can still be there. And The Get Down can be there. But this can also be there. You know what I mean? Is it through the heart?
Ram Dass talks about hospice workers, right?
Yeah.
People that work with dying people,
Yeah.
obviously. And he talks about, there's a term called professionally warm, which is, these are people that work with people who are on the way out. And if they let all of these people into their consciousness, into their hearts,
Right.
they'd be devastated. So they learn how to be professionally warm. So they're kind, but they keep their guard up. So they don't allow... you're on that bed.
Yeah.
You're the 75th person on that bed in 2 months, let's say. Like, people are dying like crazy.
Yeah.
So I can love you, but I do it with a professional warmth to protect myself. So... meditation, contemplation, all these studies, the point of all this is to get to a point where you can let that boy into your consciousness and be heartbroken, but not devastated to the point where you can't function.
So even those guys have to do a nice to see you a little bit.
What do you mean?
To go
those guys.
Callback. Aristotle, you saw the callback,
See?
baby.
Now you know how it feels to have a callback not work as well as you want it to. It's happened to me. I don't know the answer, but I think that's the point. The point isn't to get to some place where I go to heaven when I die. The point is to get to a place where you can eat everything, where you can eat heartbreak.
Can I eat some of this cookie with you?
You may, of course.
Please.
You can know deep in your mind that there's bad things and good things happening. He goes, every 45 seconds a child dies of malnutrition, but can you accept that and the joy of every 2 seconds a child is born?
Yeah.
Can you accept both of those things, the yin and the yang, the dying child and the first breath that a child's taking? That's God consciousness. That's seeing that everything belongs. And I'm not there yet, but we do tend to get very caught in the drama of things and going what's right and what's wrong.
Can you pivot between the two pretty well? Or
I'm
still
working on it. I'm
Yeah.
definitely working on it. I mean, no would be my answer today.
Right.
That's why I scroll past. I get upset sometimes when I see something really heavy on Facebook because I'm grotesque just like everybody. I wish I could go, oh my God, that must be. I have a hard enough time caring about Valerie's workday. You know what I mean? Like I'm using my caring on the people that are in my house.
Right.
And then you want me to care about a child who's in another place who we figured out all these ways to go, that's other. That's not us, that's other. We know drones are dropping bombs, but that's other. That's somewhere
Right.
else.
I've always been interested. I don't know what the secret is.
That's why the interracial marriage, where the kids are black, as you were saying, is a beautiful thing. It's a
So
merging of a white man who inherited the luxury of not having to burden his already overburdened, I'm not saying it's an excuse or a good excuse, his already overburdened brain with his own quote unquote pains, is actually saying, yeah, I'll take more. I'm going to love another thing like myself. And that's a glorious thing. And here are our children who are a part of this legacy.
Yeah, they have
now.
this shared experience and struggle.
And I care about them.
Yeah.
As much as I care, more than I care about myself.
I agree. I double down on this agreement because you have to double. It's one thing to be like, hey, I'm a supporter of that. Like, hey, I'm not a racist. But what about with your daughter? Would you let your daughter marry a black man? Or
Yeah.
would you let, right? Not in my backyard. We
Yeah.
call that
Yeah.
that rationalization. And if we always have the, well, not in my backyard, hey, I support them, but not in my backyard.
That's right.
There will always be a tribalism divide. Always.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to admit it or not. And I hope, man, and when I have kids, I hope that I'd never have that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That actually, like, the proof is in the pudding, and I'm like, yeah.
I know. It's so funny. I hope you wouldn't mind me saying, but Rob's children go to very, very diverse schools. Very diverse. They're like L.A. schools.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of black and Latino, and there's very few white people.
Right.
And I was like, that's it, man. That's why I know Rob is the real deal. I hate to out him in this way, but I'm just like, I could see my parents absolutely not wanting to send me to a school that wasn't mostly white, because that's how you would know it was good for me.
But it's under the guise of safety, again.
Exactly.
Hey, we're just looking out for you, Pete. We want what's best for you.
It's under the guise of that's a good school or whatever. It's fucking crazy, man. I'm more interested in that idea that we're not our cars. Your spirit is inside a car. You're in a brown car.
Correct.
And I'm in a white car.
Right.
And I understand, if we're going to live in the world, that there are different realities. You're talking about getting bullied and your heartbreaking story about prom.
Yeah.
I completely get it. I can try, by the way, as I was listening, I could try to relate. I was the fat kid in my school,
Yeah.
and it's not the same, but
Yeah.
I had some of that, like, of course you wouldn't want to go out with me because I'm the fat kid. Like, whatever.
We've all tapped into that doorstep moment.
I can feel 1/1,000,000th of what you felt. You know, that's how I can empathize.
Sure.
But, so I understand that we're living in the real world. But if you and I took enough acid, we would both be like, what the fuck are we talking about? There's only one of us.
Yeah.
It's awareness. And you got in that one. And I can look in your eyes. This is straight Ram Dass, but I can look in your eyes and go, you're in there? Far out. How'd you get in that? And how'd I get in this? But we know that we're not the vehicles. We're the thing inside the vehicle.
Right.
And we're not our thoughts. We're the thing observing the thoughts.
So that's our show. Hope you enjoyed it. I've put some links to Stan's Church and the Torres article and Pete Holmes' podcast with Hasan Minhaj in the show notes. Next week, a double feature with two powerful women doing their part to make the world a better place. Former guest of the show, Gail Jordan, who's running for Tennessee State Senate as a female atheist Democrat, and Nina Jackal, an activist blogger at ladyfreethinker.org. That's next week. And once again, thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.